Hey guys, what's up? This is my new camcorder. It's a Canon C100. This is an actual cinema camcorder, which means that it has a large sensor with greater dynamic range and more of an emphasis on image quality compared to something like a Canon XA15, which is a camera I have at work. So I wanted one of these for a few reasons. Probably the biggest one is I just wanted an actual cinema camera, like an actual camcorder. I wanted to try it. I wanted to experience what that would be like to use instead of like what I normally do video, which is a DSLR or a mirrorless. Like I have a T4i and I have a Canon M50. Now at work, I have access to several different camcorders and I record events sometimes and plays and things, and I've come to like certain aspects of those. One of the things I really like is the form factor of holding a camera, securing it up to my body like this, and then looking down at the monitor like so. And doing that isn't great with the C100 because the way that they've designed the fold out LCD, you can't hold the camera up against your body to keep it stabilized, so you have to hold it out in front of you. I wish that LCD was somewhere else really. Also, the LCD doesn't fold around forward. I do a lot of stuff like I'm doing right now where I really enjoy having the LCD facing back at me, so that's kind of an issue with this camera. Image quality seems really good, but I'm not just blown away. I'm not just stunned by it. I haven't actually spent enough time comparing. Maybe it's a lot better than I think. That's one of the reasons why I'm doing this. In a minute, I'm going to switch to this C100 and I'm going to compare. But if you're thinking about getting an older camcorder like this, I'm going to go over some of the negatives and then we'll see what you think. Okay, first off, the biggest problem I'm having with this, the internal battery is not changeable. I think the upgrade, I think the C100 Mark II has, like most any other camera I've ever had, the internal battery which keeps the settings and the clocks all ongoing. That probably is 5-6 year battery at most, so it needs to be replaced. But it's in here and you can't get to it without taking the camera apart, and I think it's even maybe soldered onto the board. So kind of like you have to send it back to maintenance to the Canon repair to get that changed. So every time I turn the camera on, if the battery has been out, then it loses clock setting, and it loses its clock setting, and it loses its menu settings. I think there's some workarounds for the menu settings, but the clock's kind of annoying just because I'm like, okay, this should work. Other than that, the codec this uses is AVC HD, which is kind of annoying if you're not used to it, but that's not really a problem. I'm used to it. I use it some on my other cameras and I like it. It does have a lower bit rate than I'm used to, and the color space is 420, so I have seen an improvement with 422 color space on another camera I've used, especially when you're pushing the colors very far right or left. Ultimately, I haven't found that in Premiere I can really push the footage around on this too much. When I've tried, it doesn't look good. So I thought that was one of the bigger benefits. And I think that would be a benefit if you were using an external recorder and you could do, you know, like a ProRes or something, a better codec than the AVC HD this comes with. Something that I'm not used to, which I find annoying, you have a switch. If you want to go back to replay clips, you have to actually flip the media switch from camera to media. And then there's like it's like the camera turns itself off and turns itself back on. I mean, why is that? Why on a DSLR can I just hit the playback screen and instantly go back to my footage? I'm sure that that's something they've improved on more recent models, but anyway. Autofocus, this is the upgraded dual pixel autofocus, which is the same as what this M50 I'm shooting on right now has. But that dual pixel autofocus doesn't have face detection, or if it does, it doesn't really. I've heard it does and I heard it doesn't, but there's no touch screen, so you can't really tell it what to focus on. There are some workarounds on that I haven't tried yet, but using focus lock button, setting the button to focus lock. So other negatives that I found with the camera, that's really about that's really about it. It doesn't have auto ISO, but you wouldn't necessarily want that on the cinema camera anyway. Generally, you want to set your exposure and kind of keep it the same. And then a lot of people probably wouldn't even care about the autofocus because they want to, you know, on a cinema camera, usually you're maybe more controlling your focus. Not that big of a deal. So let's look at what it does have that I have really thought is cool. It has built-in neutral density filters. That's awesome. That has really helped me out when I was shooting in the sun recently. Very, very handy thing to have. It has audio controls, and I have a XLR wireless mic, so that is great to plug into this. It also has a 3.5 jack for your like the microphones I typically use with my DSLRs, so it's got that covered. And this handle is very, very great. I mean, even though I can't necessarily brace it against my body like I'd like to and look down and compose, this handle's still a lot. I like this handle a lot. You know, it feels like using a nice, good DSLR, and then you can kind of support it underneath like this. So that's great. And then the top handle is also really handy too, so I have found I like that. There's a lot of buttons on the side for various different features, waveforms, zebras, peaking, all that stuff is handy. I haven't really got into using it much yet, but I think I will if I keep this camera. And then it has really, really good high ISO performance, though I haven't compared that to my M50. I would be surprised if it's that much better. It has custom picture settings, so the picture profiles. It has a cinema, a C-Log, a Canon Cinema Log profile, which is super flat, but does give you a lot of color, a lot of ability to push the color around. And it has a wide dynamic range that kind of gives you a pretty good picture, and then it has Canon EOS standard. So let's go ahead and take a look at the footage and compare the two, and we'll see what we think. Okay, so now I'm recording on the M50 and I'm recording on the C100. I have them as close as I can get them. The M50 has its kit lens, and the Canon C100 has a EFS kit lens, 1855. So neither one of these have like a great lens on them. I'm shooting at f4 and f4.5. So I'm not getting no crazy depth of field or anything like that, but I do have some background blur going on. And I have the C100. I always shoot my Canon and just my M50. I always just leave it in a neutral profile, which I always think looks kind of like good without really ever needing much anything done to the color. I have the Canon EOS in what's called EOS Standard, and I'm going to try a few different color profiles and see how they compare and show you the difference. So this is the wide dynamic range, and it keeps kind of enhanced colors. It doesn't make everything quite as flat, but it does seem to have a lot more range in the background. Now let's look at cinema. So this is the cinema profile on the C100, and it looks really flat, so you lose a lot of intensity and contrast, but it seems to work really, really well with color grading. You can turn up some of the intensity of the colors without losing your dynamic range. You keep some of the, you should be able to see more details in the brighter areas, more details in the shadow areas. Just going back and looking at the LCDs, I see a lot more dynamic range in the Canon, which, I mean, since it's literally like 10 times bigger, since it's so much larger and so much heavier and has so much going on, you would think surely it does, you know, have a better picture quality. Ultimately, I think that this camera was probably not something I really need. And because the battery setting is not working, it's probably going to be something I'm not going to keep, but we'll see. I might play with it a little bit more and see if I can find an easy way around that. Let's look at some close-up stills. These are zoomed in 200%. This is the M50, and I want you to pay attention to the highlights. Now, I intentionally overexposed by 2/3 of a stop to expose for the light underneath my porch, but just check out the highlights. There's really no totally blown out areas, but there's a couple bright white spots. Now let's look at the Canon C100. This is the wide dynamic range profile, and you can see there's really no totally blown out spots, and there's more detail overall, and it's also overexposed by about 2/3. Here's the cinema that I've color graded, so you can see it's a little bit even better as far as contrast goes. You can see a little bit more detail in the shadows, but it might just be the way I've got my head turned. And here is the EOS standard profile, which is totally blown out, lots of blown out highlights, over sharpened, over saturated. But if you're looking for a quick, over the top look, then why not use this one? And I wanted to show you, this is really where you can see the difference between the cinema camera and the M50 mirrorless. That is the background on the M50, and it's just blown out completely. Like the grass is blown out in places. And now let's check out the C100 wide dynamic range. Pretty much the same exposure. Look at the detail in the shadows in that potted plant. Look at the detail in the road. Huge difference in dynamic range. And again, that's the neutral profile on the M50, and this is the wide dynamic range. Now here's the cinema, and you can see I've kind of messed with the colors a little bit. It's just about the same. There's really no difference between grading the cinema a little bit or just using wide dynamic range. And finally, here it is in EOS standard, which is blown out, but it's not blown out as bad as the M50. So this really shows you the difference. This is why a cinema camera it is as expensive as it is. Big difference.